A glass of wine. That's all she asked for. A simple request from a paying passenger in a first-class seat on a transcontinental flight. But on Aerovista Flight 447, that simple request was met with the quiet, venomous sting of prejudice. The flight attendant saw a black woman, not a customer. What she didn't see was the corporate titan holding an $85 million contract over the airline's head. She didn't realize her condescending smirk and whispered insults were about to trigger a chain reaction of devastating consequences, proving that karma doesn't always wait. This is the story of how one woman's quiet dignity in the face of discrimination brought an entire airline to its knees with a single whispered phone call. The cabin of Aerovista Flight 447 from New York's JFK to Los Angeles was an oasis of beige and brushed chrome, meticulously engineered to soothe the anxieties of air travel for those who could afford it. The seats, more like personal pods, were upholstered in soft leather, reclining to a fully flat position at the touch of a button. The air was climate-controlled to a precise temperature, scented with a faint, bespoke aroma of lavender and white tea. For the passengers of first class, the world's chaos was meant to be held at bay by noise-cancelling headphones, complimentary champagne, and the deferential smiles of a highly trained cabin crew. Dr. Sadie Jordan settled into seat 2A, the gentle hum of the Boeing 777, a familiar lullaby. For her flights like this were a necessary evil, a liminal space between high-stakes meetings in Manhattan and strategic oversight at her company's headquarters in California. She was the founder and CEO of Nexus Global Logistics, a multi-billion-dollar behemoth that specialized in the intricate, high-tech dance of supply chain management for Fortune 500 companies. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument for identifying inefficiencies and solving complex logistical puzzles, was already shifting from the successful contract negotiation she'd just concluded to the Q3 performance reviews awaiting her in LA. She was dressed in a tailored navy blue pantsuit, her hair styled in elegant professional locks that rested just past her shoulders. At 42, she possessed a commanding presence that was born not of volume, but of a deep, unshakable confidence. Her movements were economical and precise as she stowed her carry-on a well-worn leather briefcase containing documents worth more than the average American home. She was a woman who navigated boardrooms, dominated by men who had built an empire from scratch with intellect and grit. She was used to being underestimated, but she had long since learned to use it to her advantage. As the last of the first-class passengers boarded, Sadie watched the flight attendants. She was a keen observer of systems, and a cabin crew was a microcosm of corporate culture. Their efficiency, their morale, their attitude towards customers, it all told a story. The purser, a man in his late 50s with a kind, tired face, greeted her warmly. But it was the other flight attendant working their section who caught Sadie's attention. Her name tag read Bailey. She was a woman in her late 40s, with meticulously coiffed blonde hair that seemed unnaturally rigid, and a smile that didn't quite reach her pale blue eyes. Bailey moved through the cabin with an air of proprietary ownership, her gaze lingering a fraction too long on some passengers, and gliding past others as if they were part of the furniture. When her eyes fell on Sadie, they narrowed almost imperceptibly. It was a flicker of an expression that Sadie knew all too well. It was the look of someone performing a swift, unconscious calculation of worth and belonging and arriving at a deficit. Sadie ignored it. She'd faced far more overt hostility in her life than a flight attendant's fleeting disapproval. She accepted a pre-departure orange juice, opened her briefcase, and began to review a complex logistics projection for a new pharmaceutical client. The world of numbers and flowcharts was her sanctuary, a place where bias had no value and results were the only currency. The The plane took off smoothly, piercing through the grey New York clouds into the brilliant, unending blue of the upper atmosphere. The seatbelt sign pinged off. The performance began. Bailey started her service, her voice a saccharine drawl. "Can I get you something to drink, sir? A glass of our Billicart salmon champagne." Perhaps she'd ask the man in 1A, a tech bro in a hoodie. "And for you, Mr. Peterson?" "The usual Glenlivet 18, she'd say to the older gentleman in 2C, a regular it seemed. Her tone was one of a conspiratorial concierge, welcoming them into an exclusive club. When she arrived at Sadie's seat, the warmth evaporated. "Drink?" Bailey asked, her tone flat, her pen hovering over her notepad, as if it were an imposition. Sadie looked up from her documents, offering a polite, neutral smile. "Yes, thank you. I'd love a glass of the Chateau Margaux, if it's available." She had noted the 2005 vintage on the wine list, a truly exceptional offering. It was a detail that mattered. One of Nexus's many subsidiaries was Elevate Catering Solutions, the exclusive catering and provisioning provider for Aerovista's entire first and business class operation. Sadie herself had approved the inclusion of that specific vintage on the manifest, believing that true luxury was in the details. It was a small but significant line item in the $85 million annual contract Nexus held with the airline. Bailey's smile became a tight, condescending line. "The Chateau Margaux," she repeated, drawing the name out, as if Sadie couldn't possibly know what she was asking for. "Honey, that's a very special, very expensive wine. We have a lovely Merlot or a Cabernet Sauvignon I can pour for you." The use of the word honey was like a tiny poisoned dart. It was designed to infantilize, to put her in her place. Sadie's calm expression didn't waver. "I'm aware of its quality," she said, her voice even. "That's why I'd like a glass." "Is it not available?" Bailey leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was more insulting than a shout. "Look, we only have a couple of bottles on board, and we have to reserve them for our most discerning passengers. It's a sort of unwritten policy, I'm sure you understand. The implication hung thick and foul in the air between them. You are not one of them." Sadie felt a familiar, weary anger begin to coil in her stomach. It wasn't the hot, explosive rage of her youth, but a cold, dense fury that she had learned to channel into decisive action. She could see the narrative Bailey had written for her in an instant. A black woman, sitting in a seat she couldn't possibly have paid for herself. Maybe she was a guest of a corporation, a diversity hire on a junket, or perhaps she'd used a family member's miles. Whatever the story in Bailey's mind, Sadie was an interloper in this space, and it was Bailey's job to be the gatekeeper. "I see," Sadie said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "An unwritten policy." "Exactly," Bailey said, patting her arm in a gesture of false camaraderie. "I'll just get you that Cabernet. You'll love it." She turned and walked away before Sadie could respond, her posture radiating self-satisfaction. Sadie took a slow, deep breath, counting to 10 in her head. She watched as Bailey moved to the next row. The passenger in seat 3A, a white man in a rumpled suit, also requested the Chateau Margaux. "An excellent choice," Sir Bailey chirped, her voice once again bright and accommodating. "Coming right up." There it was. Not subtle, not hidden. A direct, clear-as-day act of discriminatory service. It wasn't about a limited supply. It was about who Bailey deemed worthy of receiving it. A few minutes later, Bailey returned. She placed a glass of dark red wine on Sadie's tray table with a clink. "Here you are." "The Cabernet," she said without making eye contact. At the same moment, the purser delivered a glass of the same wine to the man in 3A. It was a different color, a richer, more complex ruby than the one in Sadie's glass. The final piece of evidence clicked into place. The insult was now an injury. Sadie didn't touch the wine. She simply stared at it for a long moment. She wasn't just a passenger who had been slighted. She was the CEO of the company that had sourced, selected, purchased, and provisioned the very bottle of wine she had just been denied. Her company's logo, a subtle ECS for Elevate Catering Solutions, was likely printed on the bottom of the manifest Bailey held in her hand. Bailey's prejudice wasn't just an affront to Sadie Jordan, the woman. It was an insult to Dr. Sadie Jordan, the CEO of Nexus Global Logistics. It was a fundamental failure of the service her own company was being paid millions to help provide. And in Sadie's world, a systemic failure required a systemic response. She calmly closed the file she was reviewing. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out her satellite phone, a device she carried for emergencies and for work in areas with no cell coverage. The quiet, sterile air of the first-class cabin was about to be breached. She pressed a speed dial number. It rang twice. "David, you're there." "Good," she said, her voice low but clear, cutting through the cabin hum. David Chen was her chief operating officer, a man of ferocious loyalty and legendary efficiency. If Sadie was the company's brain, David was its central nervous system, executing her vision with immediate, unwavering precision. "Sadie, is everything all right? I thought you were in the air." "I am," she replied, her eyes flicking towards Bailey, who was laughing with Mr. Peterson in 2C. "David, I need you to do something for me, right now. Pull up our master contract with AeroVista Airlines, specifically the agreement for the Elevate Catering Solutions subsidiary." There was a pause, then the faint sound of typing. "Okay, I have it. The AVNGL 2022 contract. What am I looking for?" Sadie's gaze was cold as steel. "Find the termination clause. I believe it's section 28. There should be a sub-clause for breach of service standards and gross misconduct by airline personnel affecting the brand integrity of the supplier." Another pause, this one longer. The typing was more frantic. Clause 28B. David said, his voice laced with confusion and alarm. "Termination for cause. Sadie, this clause allows for the immediate suspension of services pending an investigation and cancellation of the contract with 30 days' notice if the breach is deemed severe. It's the nuclear option." What in God's name happened? Sadie watched Bailey walk past her seat, completely oblivious, a smug little smile playing on her lips. "They failed to meet the standards." Sadie said the words as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "David, I want you to draft the notice. I am formally invoking Clause 28B. I want it on the desk of Richard Davenport, the CEO of AeroVista, before I land in Los Angeles. And I want you to suspend all non-essential provisioning for tomorrow's flights. We'll fulfill the bare minimum required by law, but all premium services are to be halted, effective immediately." On the other end of the line, there was a stunned silence. David knew Sadie. She was not prone to impulsive decisions. For her to take an action this drastic, the provocation must have been monumental. "Consider it done," David said, his voice now grim and determined. "I'll get legal on it right away." "Sadie, are you okay?" "I'm fine, David," she said, and a small, humorless smile touched her lips. "I'm about to be $85 million a year lighter, and a whole lot more satisfied." She ended the call and placed the phone back in her briefcase. She leaned her head back against the soft leather and closed her eyes, ignoring the untouched glass of inferior wine on her tray. The hum of the engines seemed to have changed its tune. It was no longer a lullaby. It was the sound of an empire beginning to crumble, and the earthquake had started right here in seat 2A. For the next hour, Sadie sat in quiet contemplation. She didn't read. She didn't work. She simply existed in the eye of the hurricane she had just created. Outwardly, She was the picture of tranquility, a passenger resting on a long flight. Inwardly, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations and consequences. She wasn't emotional. Anger had been the catalyst, but the decision itself was pure business. Aerovista had not just permitted a discriminatory act. Their employee Bailey had weaponized a product provided by Sadie's own company to do it. This created a toxic association. Elevate Catering Solutions wasn't just a supplier, it was a partner in curating a luxury experience. If that experience was being selectively denied, based on race, it contaminated her brand. It made her complicit. Allowing it to stand was not an option. It was a cancer that had to be cut out swiftly and without sentiment. Meanwhile, Bailey continued her service blissfully unaware of the corporate guillotine hanging over her airline. She collected meal trays, offered refills, pointedly skipping Sadie's seat, and engaged in light, sycophantic banter with the passengers she deemed worthy. Her world was small, confined to the fuselage of this aircraft, and the petty power she wielded within it. She mistook Sadie's silence for submission, a sign that her little power play had worked, that the woman in 2A now knew her place. The first tremor hit when the purser, a man named George, made his way to the galley. A small chime had sounded at his station, indicating an incoming A-CARS message, the digital data link system crews use to communicate with the ground. These were usually routine weather updates, flight plan adjustments, or connecting gate information. George read the message on the small screen, and his genial, weary face went pale. He read it again, his brow furrowed in disbelief. The message was from Aerovista's Central Operations Control, flagged as urgent and confidential. It read, "Immediate confirmation. Wreck passenger S. Jordan. Seat 2A. Report on any and all crew interactions. Executive Office has received Priority 1 complaint. Potential contractual breach with vendor NGL. Respond immediately." George's blood ran cold. NGL was Nexus Global Logistics. Every senior crew member knew that name. They were Elevate the Catering people, the ones who had dramatically improved the quality of their food and wine over the past 3 years. A Priority 1 complaint from the executive office linked to a major vendor was unprecedented during a flight. It was the kind of thing that ended careers. He looked out from the galley at the cabin. Passenger S. Jordan in 2A, the quiet, impeccably dressed black woman who had been so still for the last hour. He tried to recall his own interaction with her, a simple, "Welcome aboard." He hadn't spoken to her since. But Bailey had been handling that aisle. He turned to her as she entered the galley to restock her cart. "Bailey," he said, his voice low and tight. "What happened with the passenger in 2A? Bailey rolled her eyes, beginning to wipe down a counter. "Oh, her nothing. She just got a little ambitious with her wine order." I handled it how George pressed a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. "Did you have a problem with her?" "No problem." Bailey scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "She wanted the Margot. Can you believe it? I gave her the House Cabernet instead. Put her right in her place. Some people get a taste of first class and think they own the plane." George felt the floor drop out from under him. He held up the A-CARS unit so Bailey could see the screen. "You did what he whispered, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. Read this. Read it now." Bailey squinted at the screen. Her smug expression slowly dissolved, replaced by a pasty white mask of confusion, then dawning horror. "NGL, Nexus Global. Wait, that's Elevate Catering, isn't it?" "Yes, it is." George hissed, his face inches from hers. "And S. Jordan is Dr. Sadie Jordan, the founder and CEO of Nexus. We had her profile in our pre-flight briefing, for God's sake. Did you not read it?" She's a VIP1, our most important commercial partner." Bailey's mouth opened and closed silently. The colour had drained completely from her face. The name Sadie Jordan was not just the name of a passenger, it was practically royalty in the world of corporate logistics. Stories of her business acumen were legendary. To Aerovista, she was not a customer to be coddled. She was a partner to be feared and respected. I thought. Bailey stammered her mind, struggling to reconcile the image of the woman in 2A with the corporate titan she now realized she had insulted. She didn't say anything. What was she supposed to say? Announce that she owns the wine you just denied her? George shot back, his panic turning to rage. "You didn't just handle it, Bailey. You just detonated a bomb in the middle of this airline." The reality crashed down on Bailey with the force of a physical blow. Her petty act of prejudice wasn't a minor infraction. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The condescending words, the false smile, the deliberate substitution of the wine, it all replayed in her mind, now cast in a sickening, career-ending light. Her legs felt weak, and she gripped the counter for support. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What do I do? There's nothing you can do." George said, his expression grim, as he began typing a frantic, damage-controlling reply to operations. "You've already done it." Back in Los Angeles, in a sterile, glass-walled office, Richard Davenport, the CEO of Aerovista Airlines, was having an excellent day. He'd just returned from a favorable interview with the Wall Street Journal and was looking over preliminary numbers that showed a slight uptick in premium cabin bookings. At 55, Davenport was handsome, silver-haired, and possessed the easy, back-slapping charm of a man who had never failed at anything significant. He saw his airline not as a service, but as a product, and himself as its master brand strategist. His serene afternoon was shattered when his executive assistant, a perpetually flustered young woman named Chloe, burst into his office without knocking. "Mr. Davenport, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this," she said, her voice trembling as she held out a tablet. On the screen was an email with a bright red, urgent flag, and a subject line that made his blood pressure spike: "Official notice of contractual breach and intent to terminate. Agreement Avangiel, 2022. It was from the office of David Chen Ko of Nexus Global Logistics. Davenport snatched the tablet, his charming smile vanishing. He read the terse, legally precise language outlining the invocation of Clause 28B, citing a severe breach of service standards on Flight AV-047, currently in the air. The notice stated that all premium elements of their multi-million-dollar catering contract were suspended effective immediately, and that Nexus was initiating the 30-day cancellation process. "What the hell is this?" Davenport roared, leaping to his feet. $85 million a year, and they're pulling the plug because of what a bad meal. Get David Chen on the phone. "Now he's not taking calls," Sir Chloe stammered. "His office said all communication is to be directed to their legal department from this point forward." This was worse. Cutting off executive-level communication and rerouting to legal was a declaration of corporate war. "Then find out what happened on that flight," Davenport bellowed, pacing his office. "Who is our contact at Nexus? Who is on that plane?" Chloe was already typing furiously at her own workstation. "Sir, the complaint originates with Dr. Sadie Jordan. She's a passenger on AV-047. In seat 2A, Davenport stopped pacing. He knew that name. Everyone in the industry knew that name. Sadie Jordan wasn't just a vendor. She was a visionary. Losing her business would be a disaster. The hit to their service quality would be immediate and noticeable. Their competitors would be circling like sharks within hours. But worse, far worse, would be the reputational damage. If the story got out that Aerovista had somehow offended the CEO of their own catering partner so badly that she cancelled the contract mid-flight, it would be a PR cataclysm. His intercom buzzed. It was the head of operations. "Richard, we got a message from the purser on AV447. You're not going to like it." Davenport sank into his plush leather chair, a sense of profound dread settling over him. "Tell me," he said, his voice a low growl. It was a flight attendant, a woman named Bailey McLeod. She refused to serve Dr. Jordan a specific wine from the menu. The purser reports the flight attendant admitted to doing it for discriminatory reasons. She thought Dr. Jordan didn't belong in first class. The line went silent for a moment. Richard Davenport, a man who commanded a fleet of hundreds of aircraft and tens of thousands of employees, put his head in his hands. He was not a man given to introspection or moral crusades, but he understood image, and he understood money. This was an unmitigated nightmare. A single employee's bigotry was about to cost his company tens of millions of dollars and subject it to a public relations firestorm. He took a deep breath. "Get me the head of HR and our lead counsel in my office in 5 minutes, he commanded. "And get a corporate team to LAX. I want to meet that plane when it lands. We are going into full crisis mode. This cannot get out." But it was already too late. The seeds of the story were already planted, not just in corporate memos, but in the minds of the other passengers in first class who had witnessed the quiet, tense exchange. The man in 3A, who had received the wine Sadie was denied, was already discreetly typing a post for his frequent flyer forum. The story was already starting to leak. As flight AV447 began its descent into the sprawling lights of Los Angeles, Sadie finally opened her eyes. She felt a profound sense of calm. The decision was made. The consequences were in motion. When the plane landed, she remained in her seat, patiently waiting for the other passengers to deplane. She knew they would be waiting for her. As she stepped into the jet bridge, a coterie of panicked-looking Aerovista executives in dark suits stood there, led by a frantic-looking station manager. Dr. Jordan, the manager, began, his face slick with sweat. "On behalf of Aerovista Airlines, I am so sorry. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. Mr. Davenport, our CEO, sends his deepest apologies." Sadie looked at the group of anxious faces, her expression unreadable. "It was no misunderstanding," she said, her voice calm and clear. "It was a choice. An employee of your airline made a choice, and now I have made mine. My legal team will be in touch with yours. Have a good evening." She walked past them without a backward glance, her heels clicking purposefully on the polished floor of the terminal. She left behind a trail of silent, horrified executives, the first casualties in a war Bailey McLeod had started, and that Dr. Sadie Jordan was going to finish. The 24 hours following the landing of Flight AV447 were a masterclass in corporate panic at Aerovista's headquarters. The initial shockwave from Sadie's phone call had now become a full-blown seismic event, ripping through every department of the airline. Richard Davenport had assembled his crisis team in the main boardroom, a cavernous space with a 50-foot mahogany table that now felt like a war room. Present were the heads of legal human resources, public relations, and operations. The mood was funereal. "Let's get this straight, Davenport," began his voice, dangerously low. "We have an $85 million annual contract representing nearly 100% of our premium cabin catering that is currently evaporating. Our stock is going to get hammered on Monday morning if this gets out. And it's all because one of our flight attendants, a 20-year veteran named Bailey McLeod, decided to play class warrior at 35,000 feet. The head of legal, A stern woman named Helen Croft pushed a file across the table. "It's worse than that, Richard. The initial report from the purser, George Maxwell, is damning. He states Ms. MacLeod admitted, in his words, to putting a passenger in her place. When combined with the fact that she served the same wine to a white passenger moments later, we're not just looking at a breach of contract. We're looking at a textbook case of racial discrimination. If Dr. Jordan decides to sue us personally on top of the contract termination, the discovery process would be ruinous. Has Bailey MacLeod been dealt with?" Davenport snapped at the head of HR, a man named Gary. "She was met by HR and airline security upon landing," Gary said, reading from his notes. "She's been suspended without pay, pending a full investigation, which is corporate speak for she's fired. Her statement is a mess. She alternates between claiming it was a misunderstanding and blaming Dr. Jordan for being intimidating. It's indefensible. Good. Terminate her immediately," Davenport ordered. "I want her airline ID revoked, her benefits cancelled, her final paycheck mailed to her. I want her gone, erased." "Of course," Gary replied. "But Richard, firing her is the easy part. It doesn't solve the real problem." The real problem was sitting in her office across town, refusing to take his calls. Sadie Jordan was a fortress, and so far every attempt to breach her walls had failed. Davenport had tried calling her directly, only to be politely rebuffed by her executive assistant. He'd sent a formal written apology via courier, which had been returned unopened. He had dispatched his most senior LAX executive to offer a groveling apology, only to be dismissed on the jet bridge. What about a personal appeal, asked the head of PR, a young, ambitious man named Scott. You fly to her office. You fall on your sword. You tell her we're implementing mandatory top-to-bottom diversity and inclusion training. You tell her we're making a huge donation in her name to a charity of her choice. We make it about more than just the contract. Davenport considered this. He hated the idea of groveling. He was the CEO of a major airline, a titan of industry in his own right. To be seen begging for forgiveness from a vendor, even one as important as Nexus, chafed at his ego. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "Arrange it." But what do we do about the service interruption? Nexus has already halted all premium deliveries for tomorrow. Our morning flights to London, Tokyo, and Hong Kong are going out with standard domestic meal service. We're going to have a full-scale passenger revolt in our most profitable cabins. The head of operations looked grim. We're scrambling. We're trying to source from local vendors, but the scale is impossible. GMR Catering and Lufthansa's LSG Sky Chefs are our biggest competitors, but they're locked into contracts. Even if they could help, it would take weeks to scale up. We are, to put it mildly, completely screwed. Elevate's integration into our system is total. They manage everything from the sommeliers who choose the wine, to the logistics of getting fresh lobster, to JFK in time for a 7 p.m. departure. We took it for granted. Davenport slammed his fist on the table. We didn't take it for granted. We paid them $85 million a year for it. And now we're paying the price for forgetting that the person we paid it to values dignity more than our money, Helen Croft said quietly. The room fell silent. Across the city, in the sleek, minimalist headquarters of Nexus Global Logistics, the atmosphere was one of controlled, focused activity. David Chen was orchestrating the operational side of the contract suspension with military precision. Memos were dispatched, logistics routes were redrawn, supply orders were cancelled. The entire complex machinery of Elevate Catering Solutions was being methodically decoupled from Aerovista. Sadie was in her office, which overlooked the cityscape. It was a space of calm whites and greys, with a single vibrant abstract painting on one wall. She had just finished a conference call with her board of directors explaining the situation. There had been concern, of course. No one liked walking away from a profitable contract. But Sadie had framed it not as a loss, but as an investment in their brand's integrity. Our partnership with Aerovista was predicated on the delivery of a premium inclusive experience, she had told them. Their failure to uphold their end of that bargain makes them a liability. The short-term financial hit is nothing compared to the long-term brand erosion we would suffer by being associated with a company that tolerates such behavior. We are Nexus. We set the standard. We do not lower ourselves to accommodate the failures of our partners. The board, who had trusted her instincts for years, gave their unanimous support. Her assistant buzzed. Dr. Jordan Richard Davenport's office is on the line again. He is asking to come and see you in person at your convenience. Sadie looked out the window at the endless river of cars on the freeway below. Davenport's desperation was a predictable move. He thought this was a negotiation, a problem that could be solved with the right combination of apologies and financial incentives. He didn't understand that he wasn't dealing with a balance sheet issue. He was dealing with a principle. Tell his office that I am unavailable for a meeting, Sadie said calmly. Tell them that the notice of termination is unequivocal, and all further correspondence should be through our legal counsel. And Clara, yes, Dr. Jordan. Please send a gift basket to the purser on flight 447, Mr. George Maxwell. A nice one. Use my personal account. Include a note that says, "Thank you for your professionalism." Of course, Dr. Jordan. It was a small gesture, but it was important. She recognized that George was a man caught in an impossible situation who had acted with integrity. She rewarded competence just as decisively as she punished failure. The real twist of the knife came 2 hours later. David Chen entered her office, a grim smile on his face. "You're going to want to see this," he said, placing a tablet on her desk. It was an internal alert from their market intelligence division. Delta Airlines just called an emergency meeting of their procurement and service heads, David said. And my contact at United's corporate office says they're trying to figure out the termination clause on their current catering contract with GMR. The sharks are circling Sadie. They smell blood in the water. They know Aerovista is wounded, and they know the premier catering service in the industry is suddenly a free agent. Sadie allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. This was the end game. It wasn't just about punishing Aerovista. It was about repositioning her company. By demonstrating that Nexus's standards were non-negotiable, she was sending a message to the entire industry. Working with Nexus wasn't just about getting the best food and wine. It was about committing to a standard of excellence and respect that she embodied. She had turned a racist insult into the ultimate power move. "David," she said, "tell our team to prepare a presentation, a full-scale capabilities pitch. I want to see what a potential partnership with a more aligned airline would look like." Let's start with Delta. I believe their CEO, Ed Bastian, is a man who understands the value of a strong brand. "I'm already on it," David said. The phone on Sadie's desk rang. It was her head of security. "Ma'am, I apologize for the intrusion, but there's a woman at the front desk demanding to see you. She's causing something of a scene. Her name is Bailey McLeod." Sadie's eyebrows rose. This was an unexpected and incredibly foolish move. "She's been fired, then," Sadie mused aloud. "It appears so, ma'am. She's very distraught. She says she needs to apologize to you, that her life is ruined." For a moment, Sadie felt a sliver of something akin to pity. A woman's career, her livelihood was in flames because of a single ugly act. But the feeling passed as quickly as it came. Pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. This wasn't personal. It was structural. Bailey wasn't just one bad apple. She was a symptom of a corporate culture that had allowed her prejudice to fester for 20 years. "Please have security escort her from the premises," Sadie instructed, her voice devoid of emotion. "Inform her that if she attempts to contact me or any Nexus employee again, we will file a restraining order for harassment. There is nothing to discuss." She hung up the phone. Bailey McLeod's fate was a footnote in a much larger story. The real story was now playing out in the boardrooms of Aerovista Delta and United. The unraveling had just begun, and as Richard Davenport was about to discover, when a corporation's moral compass breaks, the financial collapse is never far behind. Richard Davenport's strategy to contain the fallout was predicated on one critical assumption, that the incident on Flight 447 could be kept quiet. He believed it was a corporate dispute, a messy, expensive affair that could be managed through legal channels, non-disclosure agreements, and quiet settlements. He fundamentally misunderstood the age in which he was living. The story didn't break because of a press release from Nexus or a leak from Aerovista's boardroom. It broke because of a man named Mark Peterson, the frequent flyer in seat 2C, who had been so chummy with Bailey. Mark was a tech sales executive and an obsessive aviation geek. He was a top-tier member of 3 different loyalty programs and a prolific poster on a popular online forum called Flyerverse under the username AV Platinum Pro. He had witnessed the entire exchange between Bailey and Sadie. He'd seen Bailey's condescending smile. He'd heard the lie about the unwritten policy. He hadn't known who Sadie was, but he knew discrimination when he saw it. That evening, sitting in his hotel room, he wrote a detailed post titled "Disturbing Scene in First Class" on AV 47, JFK LAX. "Hey fellow flyers," the post began. "Had a really unsettling experience on my flight today. There was a very elegant black woman in seat 2A. Flight attendant Bailey, I think, was downright hostile to her. The passenger asked for the Margot, and Bailey basically told her it was too fancy for her and brought her a cheap Cabernet. Moments later, the guy behind me asked for the same wine and got it instantly. The woman in 2A didn't make a scene. She just sat there, quiet as a statue. But it was one of the most blatant acts of racist gatekeeping I've ever witnessed on a plane. Shame on Aerovista. We pay thousands for these tickets and expect better." Initially, the post got a few dozen comments. Some expressed outrage, others shared similar stories. But then a user named Logistics Guy 88 replied, "Holy crap. I work for a shipping company that contracts with Nexus Global Logistics. We just got an internal memo that NGL's CEO, Dr. Sadie Jordan, was involved in a major service failure on an Aerovista flight today. Guys, Sadie Jordan is a black woman. Could this be her?" The forum exploded. Within an hour, the pieces were connected. Forum members, amateur sleuths with a passion for aviation, cross-referenced flight manifests, and public photos of Dr. Jordan. The story was no longer just about a rude flight attendant. It was about a black CEO being denied a product her own company provided. The irony was irresistible, the injustice palpable. A freelance journalist named Catherine Reed, who specialized in corporate culture stories and was a lurker on Flyerverse, saw the thread. She recognized the scent of a career-making story. She started making calls. She reached out to disgruntled former Aerovista employees. She contacted low-level staff at Nexus, most of whom were fiercely loyal to their CEO and disgusted by what had happened. Someone speaking on deep background confirmed the basics. The contract cancellation wasn't a rumor. It was real. Catherine wrote her article and sold it to a major online news outlet. The headline was a bombshell: Aerovista, in turmoil after flight attendant, denies wine to catering CEO, sparking cancellation of 85 million contract. The story went viral with breathtaking speed. By Monday morning, Boycott Aerovista was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. The article was shared millions of times on Facebook. TikTok creators made skits reenacting the scene. The story had everything David versus Goliath, except David was a billionaire CEO, a clear villain, Bailey, a righteous hero, Sadie, and a satisfying immediate dose of karma. For Richard Davenport, it was an apocalypse. He arrived at the office to find news vans camped outside. His phone was ringing with calls from panicked board members and furious shareholders. He turned on CNBC, and his own face was on the screen next to a plummeting stock chart. Aerovista's stock ticker, AVIO, had opened down 18%. Billions of dollars in market capitalization had been wiped out in the first few minutes of trading. "Get Scott in here," he roared. The PR chief rushed in, looking like he hadn't slept. "What is our response?" Davenport demanded. We put out a statement," Scott stammered, holding up a piece of paper. Aerovista has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. We are conducting a full investigation into the matter and have suspended the employee involved. We have reached out to Dr. Jordan to express our sincerest apologies. It's bland, it's corporate, but it's all we have. "It's not enough," Davenport yelled, throwing a paperweight against the wall. "It makes us sound guilty and weak. Where is the counter-narrative?" "There is no counter-narrative," Richard Scott shot back, his professionalism finally cracking. "A camera doesn't have to have been rolling for the truth to be plain. Your flight attendant was racist to the black CEO of your catering company. She cancelled your contract. We're not victims here. We're the villains of the story, and the whole world is watching." The public shaming of Bailey McLeod was brutal and swift. Her full name and photos were leaked online. She became the face of corporate racism, a new kind of Karen, the connoisseur Karen. Her digital footprint was scoured, and old social media posts with questionable political memes were unearthed and shared widely. She and her family received threats. She deleted her social media, but it was useless. She was already a meme, a symbol of entitled prejudice. She was forced to leave her home and stay with a relative in another state. In a single weekend, she had gone from a modestly powerful gatekeeper on an airplane to a national pariah. Her life, as she knew it, was over. For Sadie Jordan, the public explosion was a double-edged sword. She was a private person who was now the subject of intense global attention. Her photo was everywhere. News outlets clamored for an interview. She was lauded as a hero, an icon of black excellence and corporate power. While she appreciated the sentiment, she was uncomfortable with the personal celebrity. She called a meeting with David Chen and her communications director. "We need to control this narrative," she said. "I will not be defined by this incident. Nexus Global Logistics will not be defined by this. We will make one public statement. No interviews, no talk shows, just one clear, definitive statement." That afternoon, a press release was issued by Nexus. It was written by Sadie herself. It didn't mention Bailey McLeod by name. It didn't gloat about the contract cancellation. Instead, it was a cool, professional, and devastating critique of corporate responsibility. The recent incident aboard an Aerovista flight was not about a glass of wine, it read. It was about a fundamental breakdown in the standards of service and respect that must form the bedrock of any partnership. Nexus Global Logistics and its subsidiaries, including Elevate Catering Solutions, are committed to delivering excellence. That excellence is defined not only by the quality of our products, but by the integrity of their delivery. We cannot, in good conscience, be partners with any entity that does not share this core value. Our decision to terminate our contract with Aerovista Airlines is not a punitive measure, but a necessary business decision to protect the integrity of our brand and the principles upon which it was built. We move forward with a renewed commitment to forming partnerships that reflect our unwavering dedication to quality respect and inclusivity at every level of operation. The statement was hailed as a masterstroke. It elevated the conversation from a personal slight to a question of corporate philosophy. It made Sadie look like a principled leader, and it made Aerovista look like a moral and operational failure. The fallout for Aerovista continued to worsen. Business travelers, their company's biggest source of revenue, began cancelling their corporate accounts. Celebrities publicly announced they would no longer fly with the airline. The pilots' union and the flight attendants' union, excluding Bailey, who was now a pariah even among her former colleagues, issued statements condemning the incident, distancing themselves from the company's management. Richard Davenport, watching his life's work crumble, finally understood. This was not a storm he could weather. It was a tidal wave, and it was pulling him and his entire airline under. He had tried to handle it with the old corporate playbook, but the rules had changed. He hadn't been fighting a disgruntled vendor. He had been fighting a cultural movement, and he had lost spectacularly. That evening, after the stock had closed down, a catastrophic 27%, he received a call from the lead director of the Aerovista board. Richard, the director, said, his voice cold and final. "We're calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. The agenda is leadership succession. I suggest you have your resignation letter ready." The cataclysm was complete. A single act of prejudice had felled a flight attendant to CEO and had brought a multi-billion-dollar corporation to the brink of collapse. And all the while, Sadie Jordan was quietly meeting with the leadership team from Delta Airlines, sketching out the future on a whiteboard. The weeks that followed were a slow, agonizing education in the nature of modern consequences. Karma, once a slow-moving, metaphysical concept, now operated at the speed of the internet, and its judgment was harsh and unyielding. For Bailey McLeod, life became a suffocating prison of her own making. After being fired in the most public way imaginable, she found that her name was toxic. She tried applying for jobs at other airlines, cargo lines, budget carriers, anything that would get her back in the air. Her applications were met with stony silence or polite but firm rejections. Her 20 years of experience were rendered worthless. She was no longer Bailey McLeod, veteran flight attendant, but connoisseur Karen, the woman who thought she could decide who was worthy of good wine. The industry had blacklisted her. No airline wanted the PR nightmare that would come with hiring her. George Maxwell, the purser, from Flight 447, had been interviewed as part of the internal investigation, and his testimony was precise and damning. He had become a quiet hero within the company for his professionalism, even receiving a personal note of thanks from Dr. Jordan, a fact that spread like wildfire through the flight attendant rumor mill. Bailey, by contrast, was a cautionary tale whispered in galleys and crew lounges. Her finances collapsed. Without a job, she couldn't make the mortgage payments on her modest suburban house. The bank was unsympathetic. She had to sell the home she'd lived in for 15 years, watching as a "for sale" sign was hammered into the lawn that had once been her pride and joy. She moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a less desirable town, using the little equity she had from the house sale to survive. Her personal life disintegrated. Friends she had known for decades distanced themselves, embarrassed to be associated with her. Her son, a college student, was tormented online and stopped returning her calls, ashamed of his mother's newfound infamy. She was profoundly alone, adrift in a sea of her own regret. One evening, sitting in her drab apartment, eating a cheap microwave dinner, she saw a news report about a new partnership between Delta Airlines and Elevate Catering Solutions. They were announcing a revolutionary new first-class dining experience curated by a team of Michelin-starred chefs. The reporter mentioned that the deal was rumored to be worth over $100 million a year. On the screen was Dr. Sadie Jordan, standing beside the CEO of Delta, looking poised, powerful, and serene. In that moment, something in Bailey finally broke. It wasn't anger or jealousy anymore. It was a hollow, crushing understanding. She had tried to diminish a woman based on a snapshot of prejudice without knowing anything about her. She had assumed authority she didn't have over a person who wielded more real power than Bailey could possibly comprehend. Her entire worldview, built on a fragile scaffolding of perceived social hierarchies, had been a lie. She had denied Dr. Jordan a glass of wine that cost a few $100s, and in return, the universe, or at least the merciless logic of capital and consequence, had taken everything from her. For the first time, she wasn't sorry, because she got caught. She was sorry because she finally dimly understood that she was wrong. It was a bitter, useless revelation that offered no comfort. For Richard Davenport, karma was less about personal ruin and more about a spectacular fall from grace. As predicted, he was forced to resign as CEO of Aerovista. He left with a hefty golden parachute as stipulated in his contract, but his reputation was in tatters. He went from being a celebrated captain of industry, featured on the cover of business magazines, to a case study in crisis mismanagement, taught in MBA programs. He retreated to his sprawling estate in Connecticut, a pariah in the corporate world he once ruled. The invitations to sit on other boards dried up. His calls to former colleagues went unreturned. He had plenty of money, but his currency power and influence was gone. He spent his days playing golf with the handful of friends who would still associate with him, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own legacy. He would forever be known as the CEO who let his airline crash and burn over a single glass of wine. He blamed Bailey. He blamed Sadie. He blamed social media. But he never truly blamed himself for the hubris that prevented him from seeing the real crisis until it was too late. Aerovista Airlines survived, but it was a shadow of its former self. Under new leadership, they embarked on a painful and expensive rebranding effort. They poured millions into the diversity and inclusion training that Davenport had offered as a last-ditch bargain. They launched ad campaigns featuring a multi-ethnic cast of smiling employees and passengers, a desperate attempt to signal that they had changed. But the damage was done. Passengers with a choice chose other airlines. Their premium cabins were often half empty. To stay afloat, they were forced to compete on price-slashing fares and cutting amenities. They slowly morphed from a premier luxury airline into a mid-tier carrier forever haunted by the incident on Flight 447. The name Aerovista became synonymous with corporate failure and prejudice, a stain that no amount of PR money could fully wash away. They had lost the $85 million contract with Nexus, but the true cost measured in lost revenue, brand value, and market position was in the billions. Meanwhile, Dr. Sadie Jordan's star ascended even higher. The story which she had never sought had inadvertently become the single greatest marketing event in her company's history. The partnership with Delta was a resounding success. They rolled out the new Delta One Ascend service, featuring Elevate's incredible food and wine to rave reviews. Business and luxury travel blogs hailed it as the new gold standard in domestic first class. Nexus Global Logistics' stock price soared. Sadie used her newfound public platform not for self-aggrandizement, but to advocate for greater diversity in corporate leadership and supply chains. She established a foundation funded with her own money to provide scholarships and mentorship for women of color pursuing careers in business logistics and technology. She rarely thought about Bailey MacLeod or Richard Davenport. They were not individuals to her anymore. They were data points in a larger equation about action and consequence. Her actions on that flight had not been born of malice but of necessity. She had protected her brand, upheld her principles, and in doing so had triggered a chain reaction that punished the guilty, humbled the arrogant, and ultimately created a better opportunity for her business and a platform for positive change. The hard hand of karma hadn't just struck back, it had realigned the entire board. It had demonstrated, in the most dramatic way possible, that in the modern world, dignity is not a commodity to be trifled with. For some, the lesson came at the cost of a career, a reputation, or an entire corporation. For Sadie Jordan, it was simply the cost of a glass of wine she never drank. Dr. Sadie Jordan's response wasn't about revenge. It was a masterclass in consequence. Faced with ugly prejudice, she used her power not with rage, but with quiet corporate precision. This story is a stark reminder that in our hyper-connected world, karma isn't some distant myth, it's a swift and brutal reality. The person you belittle today may hold the power to dismantle your world tomorrow. If you believe in the power of karmic justice, show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing for more stories like this. And let us know in the comments, what did you think of her decisive move?